Here's a video of a conversation between Joe Rogan and Gad Saad, who is a Lebanese Jewish professor. The conversation's about anti-Semitism in general. It's about the drive amongst Palestinians and others to ethnically cleanse the Middle East of Jews. And he really gets down to the foundation. What's the fundamental drive behind that, and where it comes from, and what it's based on, and what's driving it. And really the conversation sort of has two halves, both of which are talking about anti-Semitism, but they're talking about, I would say, two very separate phenomena, separate kinds of anti-Semitism, which actually really exist in primarily two very different communities. Primarily, they're both obviously horrific and disgusting, and they're both extremely dangerous, but they're different. Well, let's have a listen.
It is an existential affront that the Jewish state exists in the Middle East. So look at all other religious minorities across Arabia. Egypt used to be completely Coptic Christian, 100%, many hundred years ago. Today, there are 10% Copts left. What happened to those Copts? There used to be tons of Christians in Syria. What happened to those Syrians? There used to be tons of Christians in Lebanon. There still are some, about 35%, but Lebanon used to be a majority Christian country. So the goal of Islam, not individual Muslims, right? Again, I don't need to preface by saying there are millions and millions of lovely, kind, peaceful Muslims. Of course there is. But Islam as an ideology, does it tolerate others? Well, we have 1,400 years of history that either says it does or it doesn't, right? We don't have to watch TikTok videos. And nothing could be clearer than what the words of Muhammad were, the prophet of Islam, who said that you need to rid Arabia of Christians, but certainly the Jews. So the existence of the land of Israel is an affront to that. One more point, and I'll cede the floor back to you. In Islam, there's a concept called Dar al-Islam and Dar al-Harb. That means the house of Islam and the house of war. Anything that's under the Islamic control is good. Anything that's yet to be under Islamic control is under the house of war. Once a territory is under Islamic control and you lose it, you have to get it back. It is your dominion forever. This is why, for example, Andalusia, which was at one point controlled, which is in current Spain, which was controlled by the Moors, an Islamic conquistador, a lot of jihadists will say, inshallah, we have to reconquer Andalusia. It is our land, because once it's under... So Israel existentially cannot exist. So why am I saying all this? You can't have peace if you have the other side that truly never wants for you to exist. That's the bottom line. If you can change people's heart where they say, look, I get a piece of land, you get another piece, let's build an incredible, vibrant co-society together, you'd have peace. But if you're taught from straight out of the womb that the Jews is the reason for every calamity in the world, you're not going to have peace.
But don't you think that there are Jews and there are Israelis that treat Palestinians as if they're less?
There is that in Texas in terms of treating people who are Hispanic. The darkness of the human heart is not monopolized by one group. There are super nasty Jews, and there are incredibly lovely and kind Jews. There are super nice Muslims and incredibly brutal Muslims. So there is no monopoly on the darkness of the human heart. So I concede that. Of course, there are Jews that are not very keen on having Palestinian neighbors. But as someone who grew up in the two worlds, right, I'm an Arabic-speaking Jew. I hang around with tons of Muslims. I hang around with tons of Jews. Have I ever heard somebody in my Jewish family say, oh, God, I can't wait for us to eradicate the 1.52 billion Muslims in the world? I've never heard that. Have I heard incessantly all the time about, inshallah, we'll get rid of the Jews? Every second. You just have to say, hi, Ahmad. The next line is, God damn it, we got to get rid of the Jews. Now, it's become a lot.
Is it really that common where you are?
It's as common as the heat in Texas. It is definitional. As a matter of fact, I introduced a game, I mean facetiously, but I mean it seriously, 6 Degrees of Jew. So that's a play on 6 degrees of...
Kevin Bacon.
Exactly. So I give you a calamity in the world, and you've got up to 6 causal steps to blame the Jew. So an Amazonian frog just died in the Amazon. Go. And so I will post these on Twitter and people give answers.
Right.
Now, oftentimes they're just playing along, but that's the mindset. You got diabetes? Well, that's because the Jews who are controlling the pharmaceutical industry are not releasing the drug. I'll give you a recent one that I faced.
Okay.
So I put up a police lineup of some guys that had been caught in Huddersfield, which is a town in England, who had been grooming and raping young British white girls. And you may or may not know this. I'm not sure if we've discussed it in the past. In Britain, over the past 25 years, there's been an unbelievable industrial scale level grooming and raping of young white girls by Asian men. That's a euphemism for men of a certain religious heritage, but you say they're Asian. So their names are, let me summarize them for you. Muhammad, Ahmad, Muhammad, Ahmad, Muhammad, 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 Ahmad, Ahmad, Muhammad, Ahmad, Ahmad, Muhammad, Ahmad, Muhammad. Okay? So I put those up and I sarcastically said, I don't have a big enough brain to do the big data analytics to understand what is the commonality across all those gentlemen. Could anybody help me? Do you know how many people wrote to me and blamed it on the Jews? Not facetiously. So now I'm going to ask you, Joe.
How?
I was just going to ask you that. How is it when 3 Muhammads rape your 12-year-old British girl, you blame it on Mordechai? 3 Muhammads lead to Mordechai. Tell me how. You tell me.
I don't know. How do they do it?
Who let them in? It's the Jewish cabal who controls immigration policy. It's George Soros, the Jew, who controls the open society ideology.
I don't think you could really just connect George Soros to Jewish. If you look at his policies, he seems anti-Western civilization.
I agree, but for the Jew hater, any causal explanation.
So one individual who just happens to be Jewish,
or they point to some other one. There's one I don't even know who she is. I think Barbara Lerner or something. Somebody will correct us in the comments section, where they show her saying something. Oh, we need to flood, and she happens to be Jewish. But for every Jewish person who is pro open door policy, there's a counter Jewish person. Here's one who is not for open border policies, right? Stephen Miller, who worked in the Trump administration, is Jewish. He's probably the biggest anti-open door immigration. So, but that's the mindset of the Jew hater. Everything is blamed. There's this incredible diabolical feature of the Jew that they're able to at times pretend that they're victims, but really they're diabolical and genocidal. It's grotesque, man.
It's weird. It's just weird that it became so out in the open. And
Ouch. Yeah, that wasn't so comfortable. One of the things that I think is important to raise, and it's something that I've mentioned before, is across many issues lately, there's been this sort of thing that many people in the West do where we all just, not including myself, but many people just buy, and it includes almost all of the corporate media and all of the, the activists, etc. They all just buy into a narrative when we all know deep down that it's completely not true, but we all just simultaneously pretend that it is true, and we all just join in the lie together. Everybody just joins in the lie together, right? And one example of this is the fact that the poor Palestinians just want to have a state alongside Israel and live peacefully in their, in their homeland that they lived in for millennia before these white Jewish people came and colonized this land out of the blue that they'd never been to before. And, the lies just pile up and pile up and pile up. But the big lie is that the Palestinians are even interested in a state alongside a Jewish state. They're not. Right? When they say from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free of Jews, they mean it. I know there's this tendency in the West for a lot of people to think that they know what people really mean better than the people know themselves, because because the people in the West are superior. So when those people say what they mean, the people in the West know what they really mean even better than they do. But they don't want a state alongside Jews, and that's because the ethnic cleansing of Jews from the Middle East is a fundamental theological or religious belief that they hold. And living alongside Jews in the Middle East, alongside a Jewish state, is just not something that they're interested in. And it goes deep. It goes very deep. And it's something that's very difficult to change or to work with. And it's expressed in the fact that they just can't stop murdering Jews. Every offer that Israel's made for a Palestinian state has been rejected. Everything that Israel has done to try to make peace with the Palestinians has been rejected. And they just keep continuing to murder, and they creep into Jewish homes on Friday night when the families are asleep and slit the throats of the whole family, of the parents, of the mother, of babies in their cribs. And then we have October 7th and blowing up buses and blowing up stores where people are eating, and they just can't stop murdering Jews. They can't help it. They can't help themselves. And obviously it's not all Palestinians, but it's too many of them. So that's the first thing. And then the second point is, I think, more of, or it's at least visibly becoming a big issue, maybe more in the West, which is that there's this insipid anti-Semitism, which is, it creeps up, and it has this cover story, which is that, it's all really the Jews' fault, and they bring it on themselves because they do all of these things, and there are all of these stories and narratives, and most of the stories and narratives are at odds with each other, and they can't coexist rationally. They don't make sense together as a collection. But the same people that are pushing one are pushing the other one that contradicts the first one at the same time. It's just that they're this fundamental bias against Jews that they have that they're often not even aware of. They think they're just being rational. It drives them to have these irrational, contradictory beliefs, and everything somehow is just the fault of the Jews. Not because we don't like Jews, just because it's their fault. They're doing it. They run the banks, and they really are in charge of the government behind the scene, and they really do control the weather, and they really do have the space lasers, and they really did start the fires in LA with their space lasers, and etc., etc., etc. And no matter what happens, like he says, there's 6 degrees of it being the Jews' fault. Like, it's the things that people can simultaneously hold in their heads that don't make sense together just because it's driven by the bias is it's quite a wonder. It can be truly fascinating. But all of this Jew hatred is disgusting, and it's extremely dangerous.